The laughter started before the race even began. It rolled across the sunlit county fairgrounds like a cruel wind, sharp enough to cut through the smell of gasoline, hot asphalt, and buttered popcorn. A man in a faded work shirt stood beside a patched-up old race car with one hand on the hood and the other holding the fingers of his little girl, while the crowd pointed, whispered, and laughed like he had brought a broken dream to a place built only for winners. They mocked him for being a single dad. They mocked his rusty car. They mocked the pink ribbon tied to the rearview mirror. But they had no idea that beneath that dented hood was not just an engine. It was a promise. And when that engine finally roared, the entire crowd fell silent. Before we begin, if you believe in kindness, second chances, and the quiet strength of people who keep going even when the world laughs at them, please like this video, comment your thoughts, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe to Lifeline Diaries for more emotional stories that remind us what humanity can still be. Marek Solen had never planned to become a race car driver. He had planned to be a husband, a mechanic, and the kind of father who came home before dinner with grease on his hands and a smile ready for his daughter. His wife, Evelini, had been the dreamer in the family. She loved speed, open roads, and the sound of an engine pushed just far enough to feel alive. Every summer, she entered the Daylight Dust Run, a daytime local race held at the edge of Briar County, where old racers, farm boys, mechanics, and weekend legends brought their cars to prove what they were made of under the burning afternoon sun. Avellini never won, but she never cared. She always said winning was not the point. The point was showing up with your whole heart. Then one rainy April morning, she did not come home. The accident happened on a road she had driven 100 times. A truck lost control. The police called it instant. Marek called it the moment the world stopped breathing. Their daughter, Sarah, was only 7. She asked for her mother every night for months, and Marek answered with stories because the truth was too heavy for a child to carry. He told her about the time Avellini raced with one broken headlight and still finished smiling. He told her about how she could hear engine trouble before anyone else. He told her how her mother said machines had hearts too, and if you listened closely, they told you where they hurt. After the funeral, the garage became Marek's refuge and prison. Avellini's car sat beneath a gray tarp in the corner, untouched. It was a weathered 1979 Falcon Ridge, once blue, now faded almost silver in places where the sun had eaten through the paint. The bumper was bent. The seats were torn. The hood had scratches like old scars. But it had been hers, and because of that, Marek could not sell it, fix it, or even look at it for too long. Life became smaller. Morning lunches. School drop-offs. Repair jobs. Bills stacked in a drawer. Nights when Sarah fell asleep clutching one of her mother's scarves. Marek worked until his back ached and his fingers cracked, but money still slipped away faster than it came. People in town were polite at first, then pitying, then forgetful. Grief made neighbors uncomfortable when it lasted longer than expected. One afternoon, nearly a year after Avellini's passing, Sarah walked into the garage while sunlight poured through the dusty windows. She stood beside the covered Falcon Ridge and asked why they never let Mom's car see the sun anymore. Marek froze with a wrench in his hand. He wanted to say it hurt too much. He wanted to say some memories were better left sleeping. But Sarah's eyes were so much like Avellini's, bright and stubborn, that he could not lie. Together, they pulled the tarp away. Dust rose in golden clouds. The car looked worse than Marek remembered. The tires were low. The windshield was cracked at one corner. Rust had gathered along the doors. But Sarah touched the hood gently, as if greeting an old friend, and whispered that Mom would be sad if her car forgot how to run. That sentence changed everything. Marek began working on the Falcon Ridge at night after Sarah went to bed. At first, he told himself he was only restoring it, only keeping Avellini's memory alive. But then Sarah found the old Daylight Dust Run flyer pinned behind a cabinet, and her face lit with an idea that terrified him. She wanted him to enter the race in her mother's car. Marek refused. He was not a racer. He was a mechanic. He had a daughter to protect, debts to pay, and no room for foolish dreams. But Sarah did not argue. She simply placed the flyer on his workbench every morning. She drew pictures of the Falcon Ridge crossing a finish line. She tied a pink ribbon from Avellini's old sewing box around the mirror. And one evening, she said that maybe people forgot Mom because nobody heard her engine anymore. So Marek entered. By race day, the Falcon Ridge still looked like a survivor, not a champion. Marek had tuned the engine with every bit of knowledge he had, replacing what he could, rebuilding what he could not afford to replace. He painted the number 27 on the doors because that had been Avellini's age when Sarah was born. The paint dripped in places. The tires were used. The seatbelt had been repaired twice. But when he turned the key at dawn, the engine coughed, shook, and then settled into a deep, steady growl that made Sarah clap her hands. The daylight dust run began at noon, under a hard blue sky. Families filled the stands with paper fans and lemonade cups. Flags snapped in the warm breeze. Other cars shone like polished knives, bright red, black, yellow, and chrome. Their drivers wore expensive suits, sunglasses, and confidence. Marek arrived in his work boots and faded shirt, with Sarah beside him wearing her mother's old racing cap. That was when the laughing started. A group of men near the registration table called his car a junkyard miracle. One woman asked loudly whether the race had a sympathy category. A younger driver named Voskalder, whose father owned half the county dealerships, walked around the Falcon Ridge with a smirk and said Marek must have taken a wrong turn on the way to the scrap auction. People laughed harder when they saw Sarah polishing the side mirror with a towel. Marek wanted to leave. Not for himself, but because Sarah heard everything. Her small shoulders tightened. Her smile disappeared. He knelt beside her and told her they could go home if she wanted. She looked at the car, then at the pink ribbon fluttering inside, and shook her head. She said her mother never quit because people were loud. Those words held him in place. The race was 5 laps around a rough country track, part paved, part dirt, with one long straight stretch called Mercy Road and a sharp turn locals called Widow's Bend. Marek had worked on engines his whole life, but driving one at speed was different. His palms were damp when he climbed in. The seat smelled faintly of old leather and Avellini's lavender oil. For one impossible second, he imagined she was beside him, laughing at his nerves. The announcer barely hid his amusement when he called Marek's name. The crowd chuckled again. Sarah stood near the fence, both hands gripping the wire, her cap too big for her head. Marek looked at her, then at the ribbon on the mirror, and placed his hand over the gear shift Avellini had once held. The flag dropped. The first roar belonged to everyone else. Cars launched forward in a storm of noise and dust, leaving Marek behind for half a heartbeat. The Falcon Ridge trembled like an old horse startled awake. Then Marek pressed the pedal down, and the engine answered. It did not scream like the newer cars. It roared low and fierce, from somewhere deep, somewhere wounded and alive. The sound rolled across the track and struck the crowd like thunder. Conversation stopped. Laughter vanished. Heads turned. The Falcon Ridge surged forward. Marek did not lead. Not at first. He fought for control as the car rattled over the rough edge of the track. Dust slapped the windshield. Tires spit gravel. Voskalder cut sharply in front of him, forcing him wide, and the crowd gasped as Marek nearly clipped a barrier. For a moment fear climbed into his throat. He saw Sarah's face. He saw hospital lights from the day he lost Avellini. He almost eased off. Then he remembered what Avellini used to say, fear was not a stop sign, it was proof you were still alive. Marek held the wheel tighter. Lap by lap, something changed. The shiny cars were faster on the straightaway, but the Falcon Ridge handled the dirt turns with stubborn grace. Marek knew machines. He could feel the engine's rhythm through his bones. He knew when to push and when to let the car breathe. At Widow's Bend, where others braked too hard, he eased into the turn and came out clean. One car spun behind him. Another overheated. The crowd, once cruel, began to watch with open mouths. By the third lap, Marek was no longer last. Sarah screamed from the fence, not with fear now, but with wild belief. The pink ribbon flashed in the sunlight each time the car passed. Marek's heart pounded so hard he could barely hear the announcer shouting that the old Falcon Ridge had moved into fourth place. Fourth became third when a yellow coupe blew a tire. Third became second when Marek took the inside line at Widow's Bend and slipped past a black roadster in a cloud of dust. Only Voss Calder remained ahead. Voss drove like someone who believed the road belonged to him. His car was powerful, expensive, and clean enough to reflect the sky. On Mercy Road, he pulled ahead easily. But near the dirt section, he grew careless. He blocked Marek twice, once so sharply that the Falcon Ridge's right tire kissed the edge of the ditch. The crowd booed. Marek heard it, but it sounded distant. He was no longer racing for them. He was racing for the nights Sarah cried into his shirt. For every bill he had paid late. For every person who treated grief like weakness. For Avellini's forgotten laughter. For the little girl at the fence who needed to know that broken things could still move. The final lap began. The sun burned white overhead. Dust hung over the track like smoke. Marek's engine temperature climbed. A warning light flickered. The Falcon Ridge shook harder now, every bolt begging for mercy. Voss was 3 car lengths ahead. Then 2. Then 1. At Widow's Bend, Voss braked late, trying to force Marek back. For one terrifying instant, it looked impossible. Marek heard Avellini in memory, clear as daylight, listen to where it hurts. The Falcon Ridge was not asking him to slow down. It was asking him to trust it. He shifted, eased left, and let the old car slide through the turn with the elegance of a dancer who had waited years for one last song. Dirt exploded behind him. The crowd rose to its feet. Voss corrected too late. Marek came out of the bend beside him, both cars flying toward the finish line. The sound was enormous. Engines, screams, wind, tires, heartbeat. Sarah ran along the fence, crying his name. Marek pressed the pedal down until there was nothing left between him and the promise he had made without speaking. The Falcon Ridge crossed the finish line first by less than half a hood. For a second, nobody moved. Then the fairgrounds erupted. People shouted. Hats flew into the air. The announcer's voice cracked. Mechanics ran toward the track. Marek slowed the car, shaking so badly he could hardly steer. When he stopped near the fence, Sarah slipped through before anyone could stop her and ran straight into his arms. He lifted her off the ground and held her as the crowd cheered around them. But the loudest moment was not the victory. It came when Marek stepped onto the small wooden platform to receive the trophy. The same people who had laughed now stood silent as Sarah placed the pink ribbon around the trophy's handle. Marek looked out at their faces, then down at his daughter. His eyes filled with tears, not because he had won a race, but because for the first time in a year, he felt Avellini not as a wound, but as warmth. He did not give a grand speech. He simply said that the car belonged to his wife, that his daughter believed before anyone else did, and that sometimes people laugh at what they do not understand because they cannot see the love holding it together. Voss Calder stood at the edge of the crowd, his jaw tight, but even he did not speak. Later, as the afternoon softened into gold, strangers came to apologize. Some shook Marek's hand. Some praised the car. Some knelt to tell Sarah her mother would have been proud. Marek accepted the words quietly, but he knew the real victory had already happened. It was not the trophy. It was the way Sarah stood taller. It was the way she smiled without sadness hiding behind it. It was the way the Falcon Ridge ticked and cooled under the sun like a tired heart finally at peace. That evening, Marek and Sarah drove home slowly with the windows down. The trophy sat between them, the pink ribbon fluttering in the warm air. Fields rolled past in shades of amber and green. For the first time since Avellini died, the road ahead did not feel empty. Sarah leaned against the seat and said she thought Mom heard the engine. Marek looked at the horizon, where the daylight stretched wide and gentle, and whispered that he thought so too. Near the old bridge outside town, he pulled over. Together, they stepped out and watched the sun pour gold over the fields. Marek placed a hand on the hood of the Falcon Ridge. It was warm from the race, warm from the miles, warm from becoming alive again. Sarah placed her hand beside his, small and steady. Neither of them needed to say much. Some promises are not spoken. They are rebuilt, bolt by bolt, tear by tear, until they can carry you forward. If this story touched your heart, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to Lifeline Diaries. Your support helps more stories of love, courage, loss, and second chances reach people who may need them today. Special request: comment, "I believe in second chances," if you have ever seen someone rise after the world counted them out. Years later, people in Broward County would still talk about the day a single dad entered a race in a battered old car and taught a laughing crowd to be quiet. But Marek never told the story as a tale of revenge. He told it as a tale of love. Because the truth was, he had not entered that race to prove people wrong. He had entered because a little girl believed her mother's dream deserved one more day in the sun. And on that bright afternoon, when her engine roared, grief loosened its grip, kindness found its way back into the crowd, and one broken family remembered that life, like an old engine, can still roar again when someone refuses to give up on it.